ألا بذكرك قلبي يطمئن ألا.
Okay, أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين محمد بن عبد الله وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم من الآن إلى يوم الدين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Welcome everyone back to session number 45. It's really been a barakah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He's allowed us to continuously come together on these Sunday afternoons. And we are honored to be able to share this time with each other as others are passing away and returning back to Allah. So before we get started, we'll ask Brother Abdur Shakur to bless our session with some ayat min al-Quran al-Azim. Tafadhal Abdur Shakur.
MashaAllah. Shukran. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. A'udhu billahi minash shaitan rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. يا أيها الذين آمنوا استعينوا بالصبر والصلاة إن الله مع الصابرين ولا تقولوا لمن يقتل في سبيل الله أمواتا بل أحياء ولكن لا تشعرون ولنبلونكم بشيء من خوف وجوع ونقص من الأموال وأنفس والثمرات وبشر الصابرين الذين إذا أصابتهم مصيبة قالوا إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون أولئك عليهم صلوات من ربهم ورحمة وأولئك هم المهتدون. O you who believe, seek help in patience and salat. Truly Allah is with the sabirin, the patient ones. And say not, those who are killed in the way of Allah, that they are dead. No, they are living, but you perceive it not. And certainly, we shall test you with something of fear, of hunger, loss of wealth, of lives, and fruits. But give glad tidings to the patient ones, as sabirin. Those who, when afflicted with a calamity, say, from Allah we belong, to Allah we belong, and truly to Him we shall return. They are those on whom are the blessing, salawat, who are blessed will be forgiven from their Lord, and they are those who achieve and receive His mercy, and is they who are the guided ones. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Thank you, Brother Abdur Shakur, for blessing our session from the very beginning with Quran. Today's guest speaker and presenter is a historian, an accomplished researcher, and a lover and appreciator of Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, Malcolm X. May Allah have mercy on his clean soul and his struggling soul and his sacrificing soul. Brother Abdur Rahman Muhammad has been attached to the life and legacy of Hajj Malik al-Shabazz for decades. His admiration for him and love for him and respect for him is something that has been with him, as I said, for many decades. And according to Brother Abdur Rahman's own speech, he has been troubled by there not being an honest and accurate and truthful conclusion surrounding who killed our martyr, all of the reasons associated with that, and all the players involved. And so with that, he embarked on an effort to try to bring light and clarity and a conclusion to this, quote, mystery. in some ways, a mystery that we can all see. COVID-19 and its appearance has hindered all of our movement, as well as Brother Abdur Rahman, who, following the release of the documentary, probably had many speaking engagements before or since the release, and probably throughout the year he would have been active, and he's still active. So to have him with us today is really an honor. Asante ya Sheikh Abdur Rahman.
Brothers and sisters, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.
First of all, I want to say that it's really so nice to see all your faces. We all know one another. We've all been around a long time, working to advance the cause of al-Islam here in the United States. And we all are old friends, and it's a great opportunity to come before you today because you all are a very highly educated audience regarding the life of Brother El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz Malcolm X. So it's always a great opportunity to speak to such an august audience, such as you all. And I see all the faces, Brother Hakeem, Rashid, my good friend from Howard University, Brother Mahir, Salahuddin, all you brothers, man, and sisters, Sister Zarina. We're all friends and brothers and sisters. And again, it's an honor for me to come before you today. I think it's a wonderful thing to see the resurgence of the name of Brother Malcolm X El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz. Even though we've just celebrated the holiday and birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I find it quite interesting that it's really the name of Malcolm X who's been lifted up over the last couple of years. And in fact, just over the last year, there's been about 5 major works, both historical and fictional, that have appeared that have brought Malcolm back to the public imagination and put him, in fact, on the international conversation. We had last year, The Godfather of Harlem, which was a fictional depiction of the relationship between Malcolm X and Bumpy Johnson, the Harlem gangster. We, of course, had Who Killed Malcolm X, which garnered an Emmy nomination, and it was selected out of a field of 2,000 documentaries last year. Only 5 were nominated. And so that is, a great honor and testament to his legacy. We just try to be a humble servant and try to bring some type of closure to his brutal assassination on February 21st, 1965. But I can share with you that documentary had a global impact. The day after it aired, I received emails from literally every place on the globe: South Africa, Mali, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, India, New Zealand, Australia, England, Malaysia, Indonesia, all over, Iran. I received emails from all over the world, and it's still being aired. I still receive emails every single day. And that's a testament to the legacy and impact that our brother has had on the struggle of struggling people all over the world. And we're grateful for that. So you had that. You had the book by Dr. Peniel Joseph, who was also in the series, who wrote the book, The Sword and the Shield, biography of Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King. You've had this new book that has come out by the journalist Les Payne, The Dead Are Rising, and it's garnering quite a bit of acclaim and awards. I'm going to be doing a book review on this during Black History Month. And just recently, last week, we had the Amazon Prime production called One Night in Miami, which was a fictional or dramatization of the night that Muhammad Ali, or Cassius Clay, the young Cassius Clay, won the heavyweight championship of the world, beating Sonny Liston on February 25th, 1964. And it's supposed to be a dramatization of what may have happened, the conversation and discussion that may have taken place that evening between Malcolm X, Cassius Clay, Jim Brown, and Sam Cooke. I did a review on that also last week. It's on my Facebook page. You can watch it. But 5 major productions just over the course of a year featuring our brother. Okay. So you know, it's a very interesting time for these productions to come out, because during this COVID period, when everyone is home and really are not supposed to go out that much, it gave the entire country the opportunity to reintroduce itself to the life of Malcolm X in a way that probably would not have happened if we didn't have this pandemic. So, you know, there's a ni'mah, there's a blessing even in the dark sides of life, right? Now today, what I wanted to do is kind of unpack some of the ideas of our brother. I'm looking at the audience, I'm looking at the faces. All of you all have heard these speeches. You've all read his, you know, his books, the books have been written about him. You guys are very learned. I'm speaking to the Muslims. We feel that we own Malcolm, okay, and we do. But we're also Black people. And one of the things that I really found significant when I was doing my research in the Schomburg Center there in New York is a letter that Malcolm wrote to one of the Muslim leaders overseas, where he was telling them that, look, you all want me to preach Islam, the true Islam, to my people, to the American people, but you want me to jump over Black people, okay? You want me to make it like a universal message and kind of de-racialize his movement and his organizing and what have you. And he said, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that, okay? Because as long as I live in this racist country, this white supremacist country, okay, that I have to fight for the advancement and the freedom of Black people. And Malcolm X was a Pan-Africanist, and he said that he was a Black nationalist. And I want to unpack that a little bit today. But yes, he was a Muslim, but he was also very much committed to the cause of Black people in America. And you know, for that, he will always be remembered. But again, he was a human. And he was moving very fast intellectually. He didn't have a lot of time to reformulate his thoughts, reformulate his philosophy of where he was going. In fact, in the autobiography, there's a quote of his about 3 days before his assassination. He was asked in an interview what his philosophy now was. Where are you at now? And the quote, in so many words, it goes like this. He says, I'm man enough to tell you Right now, I don't know, what my philosophy is, but I'm flexible. Okay, and so that's his final statement on that. And I think it's critical at this time, since he is so much in the public space, to try to unpack some of his ideas, and not as a criticism, or not to disparage him in any way, or what have you, but to try to break down some of his ideas, because Malcolm X lived a long time ago now. All right, we're almost 60 years removed from his assassination. When you guys knew me back in the days of Howard, right, we all had black hair, black in our beard was black, and we were all young and fiery, okay, and we had all the answers, okay, and we got into it with one another and all like that, But now, alhamdulillah, Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala is calling all of us back to him. And it seems like almost every week, someone is being called back to their Lord. And we're very, we're at a certain point in our development, in our age, where we can look back objectively, reflectively, and with some wisdom, and see, where Malcolm was and where he was going, to see where some of his ideas were viable and beneficial, where some of his ideas maybe were off track or needed some analysis, and if necessary, even criticism. I'd like to take us back to two of Malcolm's most famous speeches: the Message to the Grassroots and the Ballot or the Bullet. Those two speeches contained some of his most notable quotes. They're quoted all the time. They're enthralling, they're electrifying. The Message to the Grassroots speech was rated 95th of the top 100 speeches in the 20th century by a committee of 136 scholars of oratory and rhetoric, American oratory and rhetoric. The Message to the Grassroots, of the top 100, it was rated 95th. But it gets better. That was the Message to the Grassroots. The Ballot or the Bullet was rated, out of the top 100, it's on the list as well. Of the top 100 speeches of the 20th century, it was rated number 7. Number 7. Okay? It's his most powerful piece of oratory, and it's the most polished version of that speech, because a lot of folks don't really know that he gave that speech a number of times. The speech that we hear most often is not the one that's cited in history, the Ballot or the Bullet. The most developed form of that speech was April 3rd, 1964, at the Corey Methodist Church in Cleveland. But that's not the version that most of us have heard, okay? In fact, that version of the speech is very difficult to get your hands on. If you go to YouTube, the version that you hear was from April 12th, 1964, the day before he went on Hajj, given in Detroit. That's the version that we hear, okay? Now, what I like to talk about is the evolution of his thinking between the Message to the Grassroots and the Ballot or the Bullet. I want to unpack some of his ideas, because I think that some of the ideas advanced in the message to the grassroots problematic for some of the young people nowadays. I don't think you can just give that speech to a young person today without giving them some type of commentary and some type of guidance on how to understand that speech and how he evolved to the ballot or the bullet. Because he made a radical shift between those two speeches. Radical shift. And let's try to unpack some of that. In order to do that, I'd like to go back to the autobiography of Malcolm X. You all have all read this book, and that's the beautiful thing about such an educated and informed audience. You all have read this book many times, okay? In this book, his classic text, iconic book, powerful book. Okay? In this book, which I'm told is one of the most read pieces of literature in the penal system. Okay, it's one of the reasons why so many brothers and sisters come out of the penal system Muslim. They all read it. Okay, they read it many times. However, I would argue that there's some ideas in that book that have to be unpacked. Ideas that move into the message to the grassroots and ideas that Malcolm himself came to see as kind of problematic. That he came to see, okay? This is not Abdur Rahman going at Malcolm, but I want to talk about some of these ideas. It is very clear from reading the autobiography, and this has been noted by many scholars, that Malcolm had a problem with what he called the black bourgeoisie, okay? Malcolm had a problem with black people who exhibited airs and pretensions of being a big somebody, right? He even mentioned, for example, Howard University by name. When he took the Concorde, when he took the train down, the first job he could get on the trains, he visited Washington, D.C. And he talked about those black folks who went to Howard, who were doing menial jobs and, you know, as if to say, you have all this education, you know, but the condition is appalling. And in those days, in the 40s, Black Washington was in bad shape. You know, it was so bad that Eleanor Roosevelt had to prevail on her, you know, her husband to try to do something about these alleys and these gutters and these ghettos. It was really, you know, if you've seen pictures of it, it was really disgraceful. He talked about the 400 in Boston, right? The Negroes on the Hill. With these airs and pretensions, you know, you ask him, what do you do, brother? Well, I work, you know, I work on the Hill. I work at the Capitol, you know. And to come to find out, the brother is a shoe shine boy at the Capitol. But he would, well, brother, what do you do? Well, you know, I'm in banking. You know, I work in banking, and come to find out, he's the janitor at the bank. And he, you know, he didn't like this. Okay, he had a problem, even when he talked about leaving Lansing. He said, I'm glad I left Lansing, because if I had actually gone to law school, I just would have been one of those educated bourgeoisie Negroes waiting for the crumbs that fall off the white man's table. And I got spared from that fate. You know, he's rationalizing, you know, not becoming a lawyer, because he would have become one of these bourgeoisie Negroes. Okay, the autobiography is dripping with this kind of sentiment. It really is. And if you look at his time in the Nation of Islam, the Nation of Islam, although it claimed to be representing the salvation of all of Black people, the totality of Black people. Nevertheless, Elijah Muhammad used to make it clear, and Malcolm used to make it clear, that his message, first and foremost, was for the little Black man and woman in the mud. Okay? The Black man and woman on the margins of society, the worst of the Black community, the most incorrigible, the most downtrodden of the Black community, the poorest of the Black community, the least educated of the Black community, the Black community that the civil rights movement didn't want, were embarrassed about. You know what I'm saying? The church didn't want these types. Those are the people that the Nation of Islam catered their message to. All right, you all know this. And the way the Nation of Islam framed its message, they framed it in a class form to appeal to a certain demographic of our people. And that's where it was most successful. Okay, it was a long time before the Nation of Islam was able to reach college graduates. In fact, that's one of the reasons why Malcolm was so attracted to Sister Eddie Sanders, because, you know, she was studying to be a nurse. And it is, in fact, Malcolm himself who took the nation to the university, who took the nation, you know, to the national stage through his, you know, very fine education that he had acquired through his self-study and his autodidacticism in prison. Before that, it was just a small, unknown little cult. This is what Wilford said, his brother. He said, before Malcolm joined it, hardly anybody had heard of it. Okay, so he can rightly claim to have built the nation and to have given it national and international prestige. That was all due to him. Him, and mostly him alone. And he had a lot of help. Yes, he did. He couldn't have built all those schools by himself. That is true. And it is true that many of those brothers and sisters did feel some resentment towards Malcolm, because he did get a lot of the credit. He got most of the shine. He had a lot of help. But without his very fine mind and oratory, it would have never happened. It would have never happened. With all of the helpers, with all of the assistants, with all of the administration, it would not have happened without his singular impact on it, okay? However, it was a class message. The Black man and woman in the mud. And that's the way the Black middle class looked at the nation. They said, oh, okay, well, that's great for them. They need that. Those people, they need that. They straighten them up, they clean them up. But that's good, you know, because we're not going to have them. We don't want them in our church. We don't want them in our lodge. We don't want them in our, you know, the Black bourgeoisie is something else, especially in those days. Then I talk about the Black middle class. And Malcolm had a resentment towards them. All right. It was palpable. It came out in his speeches. So this comes out in the message to the grassroots. And I would argue that we have to be very careful when we give this speech to our youth and future generations, because it marked a certain place in his development at a certain time. And it was a place in his development that he moved away from. Okay, and that message was revolution. Okay, violent revolution. That's the message that I heard there at Howard University. You know, and even before that, when I was in high school, it's a message of revolution, overturning the system. He doesn't give you any options. It's either the Black revolution or the Negro revolution, right? That's how he framed it. That's the dichotomy that he presented. When that speech was delivered, November 10th, 1963, just maybe a month before his suspension. Everyone recognized that there had been a change in his thinking. That speech is, many people believe when they listen to that speech, it's a post-Nation of Islam speech. Doesn't even sound like a Nation of Islam speech. Some of that's because it was edited. All right, all of the hosannas to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, all of that was edited out by the brother who recorded it, Milton Henry, who was very close to Malcolm. Milton Henry, who would go on to be one of the founders of the Republic of New Africa, him and his brother Richard, Mario Obadelli. Milton Henry, who went to the OAU conference with Malcolm on the second time, July 9th, 1964. It's Milton Henry who took Malcolm to the hospital when he got violently ill in Egypt. You know, he came later to believe that possibly he was poisoned. It was Milton Henry. So Milton Henry recorded that speech, and we have a lot to be thankful for, because Milton Henry founded the Afro-American Recording and Broadcast Company that recorded the three most important speeches of Malcolm, or three important speeches, two of the most important. Milton Henry recorded the message to the grassroots. He recorded, that was on November 10th, 1963. He recorded the version of the Battle of the Bullet that we most often hear, which was April 12th, 1964, 5 months later. And he also recorded what's called the last speech, the one that Malcolm gave in Detroit right after his house was firebombed. He recorded those three speeches. You know, so a lot of Malcolm's legacy we have to thank to Milton Henry. But he edited out all of the, you know, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. That's why the Honorable Elijah Muhammad taught us, but he edited all that out. He didn't want to hear all that. So when he put the record out, it sounds like a post-Nation of Islam speech. Anyway, Malcolm was being influenced by the revolutions, the anti-colonial revolutions that were going on throughout the world, but especially throughout Africa. But he also, you know, mentioned the Cuban Revolution, and he begins that speech by talking about the Bandung Conference and the importance of coming together in unity and you know, kind of our differences, submerging our differences. And then he goes into his discussion, his analysis of the Black Revolution versus the Negro Revolution. The Black Revolution is based on land, right? He talks about what is the basis of revolution. He says it's based on land. He said, and when you want land, that's called nationalism. When you want a nation, that's called nationalism. And he said, a revolution is bloody, a revolution is hostile, a revolution overturns systems, it overturns anything that gets in its path, okay? And contrasted that with the Negro Revolution, which is the civil rights establishment, the civil rights desegregation campaigns that were being waged. And, you know, he gives us two options: overturn the system through revolution, or the sellout, the we shall overcome, holding hands and singing, the Negro Revolution, wanting to sit down on the toilet next to white folks and this kind of thing, right? Trying to integrate with them, sit down with them and be passive and integrate, but come back, you know, crawl back to the plantation. And in order to, you know, make this point, he gives us the metaphor of the house Negro and the field Negro to illustrate this point. Okay, we all heard this. We all know it very well. Point here is this. Who are the house Negroes? Who are the house Negroes? Well, he told us who they are. The civil rights leaders. Dr. Dorff, Bayard Rustin, all of these types, okay? They're the ones that are trying to put the Negro to sleep, trying to integrate with the white man. And the house, in this instance, is white American society, okay? If he's talking about the house Negro or the house of the plantation house back in slavery days, what is the house today? Okay, what is he talking about? He's talking about white American society. And that the goal shouldn't be to try to integrate into the white man's house, into the crawl back on the plantation. We should be either one, trying to overthrow the system through violent revolution, or complete separation, just going someplace else, or establishing our own plot of land, right? Which is called nationalism. All right. He said, anytime you want a nation, that's called nationalism. And nationalism is based on having some land. Okay. That doesn't give us very many options. This is the kind of speech that I and many young brothers and sisters listened to when we were younger. And this is a revolutionary speech. It makes you into a revolutionary. It makes you pessimistic about the system you live under now, which is why, by the way, the civil rights establishment and the entire Black middle class reviled Malcolm. It's not just white people. It's not just white society that feared Malcolm and that didn't like him and didn't like the Nation of Islam. It was most of the Black middle class, the Black professional classes that had a problem with Malcolm as well. Thurgood Marshall, who would go on to become the first Black Supreme Court justice, detested Malcolm, reviled Malcolm. If you look at the autobiography of Malcolm X, get the epilogue, look at what Carl T. Rowan said about Malcolm when he was assassinated. Why is everyone crying about this Black fanatic? I don't get it. And Carl T. Rowan was still doing radio commentaries when I came into Howard in 1980. He was still on the radio. This is Carl T. Rowan, So he wasn't universally loved and respected and appreciated like he is today. The Black middle class had nothing for Malcolm, nothing. And that's the reason why, by the way, when the NAACP student chapter, not the national, the student chapter of Howard University, invited Malcolm to speak on the campus on February 14th, 1961, Howard said, no, we're not having him speak here. No way in the world. Calling white people the devil, telling people they should separate from America. Man, Howard University gets this incredible federal appropriation from Congress. That wasn't going to bring Malcolm to the campus. No way, man. So he was blocked. But the students wanted him bad. And this is what was going on. When you listen to Malcolm, he says, you young people, you talking about revolution, going back to the message to the grassroots. You better be careful what you ask for. If you knew what revolution means, revolution is bloody, it's hot. It overturns everything that gets in its path. I'm afraid that if our people really knew what revolution means, they wouldn't use that term, okay? But the young people at this time were very angry. The generation that had grown up, let's say from the Montgomery bus boycott, 1955, let's say you're a 10-year-old kid, a black kid, 1955. Well, by now, you're of college age, and this generation was impatient with nonviolence. All right, they were impatient with what was called gradualism and fighting things through the courts and legislation. They were now starting to listen to Malcolm. And, Malcolm was talking about how the country was becoming a racial powder keg because of this new generation of black youth who were dissatisfied. And we're talking openly about revolution, and we're studying what was going on in Africa and the anti-colonial struggles. So the students wanted to hear Malcolm, but the administration said no. The Board of Trustees said no, hell no. So he was blocked for about 9 months. And it was none other than Dr. E. Franklin Frazier, who would only have 1 more year to live, who had been at Howard since about 1934, the great sociologist and writer and friend of Dr. Du Bois, who wrote the classic book, The Negro Family in America, and also the book, The Black Bourgeoisie. He said, no, we're a university. Let the man speak. Let him come. And he ultimately prevailed on the university, but the only way really he could do it was it had to be a debate. Couldn't just let Malcolm just come in here and run his thing. We're not having, so they made it a debate between Malcolm X and Bayard Rustin. And that debate took place on October 30th, 1961. I say all that to say that, Malcolm's ideas were problematic. Yes, those ideas had always existed. There had always been black people who have argued that we should separate, go back to Africa, or at least get some land of our own. That has always been the case since we arrived here. The very first African-American newspaper, Freedom Journal, founded by Samuel Cornish and John Russwurm in New York, was, its editorial line was that we should go back to Africa. Well, the paper only lasted about 2 years because the black New Yorkers weren't having that. They're like, hey, we're from New York. We're not going back country. Okay, so we've always had this divide, and the Nation of Islam came down squarely on separation. All right, it was really just another version veneer, and it only had a very small following of black people in America. A lot of people don't know that. Okay. In 1963, if I recall the date correctly, Newsweek magazine did a survey. They did a poll of most black people in America, and they asked, who do you mention about? Dr. King's strategy, approach, or Elijah Muhammad and his separatist approach? 85% of black people went with Dr. King. Only 15% went with the Nation of Islam. But it was a loud 15%. It was a strident 15%. Okay. And, the point I'm getting at here is that until Malcolm really goes to, when he goes to Africa, but even before that, by the time he gets to the Ballad or the Bullet, he's moved away from the violent overthrow of the system. Because remember, he defined the violent overthrow of the system, right, as black nationalism. He said a black man, he wants a nation, he wants land through revolution. do bloody revolution. And he framed the March on Washington as a complete sellout. Okay. He said, and he talked about the house Negroes who were putting the field Negroes to sleep. He said, we even had one talking about our astronauts. He said they won't even let them near the plant. He's talking about our astronauts. That's the house Negro. You say, I haven't left anything in Africa. Why you left your mind in Africa? So the message of the grassroots speech doesn't give us a way out. Doesn't really give us a practical solution unless, unless you want to take up arms and go to war against duly constituted power. All right. Also kind of problematic to me is that Malcolm compared our condition to the colonized brothers and sisters in Africa, right? In Algeria, in Tanzania, all right? The Mau Mau in Kenya. Not really, it doesn't seem to understand that, there's quite a big difference between a people colonized on their own land by a foreign power, right? That has to come from Europe to colonize you on your own land, and our situation here, where we were just a minority, okay? So the idea that we're gonna create a Mau Mau here in the United States as a minority on a land that is not even our original land, all right? He seems to have understood that, because by the time he gets to the ballot or the bullet, in fact, the very name, the very title of the speech shows you that he kind of understands now. Yes, he's still, belligerent. He's still angry. He's talking, what are we, right? These young people, they don't care about these odds and so on and so forth. So he's holding up the specter of violence. But then he starts talking about the ballot. And he said, and he redefined the definition of nationalism. In the very beginning of the ballot or the bullet, he says, I'm still a Muslim. I still believe, Mr. Muhammad's philosophy. He taught me everything I know. That was an olive branch to the nation. And it was also, something he had to say to keep his own followers, because, they still believed in Elijah Muhammad. They just thought that Malcolm had to leave to, implement Mr. Muhammad's program unencumbered, right? But they still believed in the nation, those people who left with him. But Malcolm, he didn't believe it. At that point, he didn't believe in the nation anymore. Okay, he didn't believe in the nation. Even though this was the eve of his Hajj, he's still giving credit to Elijah Muhammad and his version of Islam, even though at that point, he didn't really believe it anymore. But the point I'm trying to get at here is that Malcolm changed his definition of Black nationalism from the message of the grassroots speech to the ballot or the bullet. By the time he gets to the ballot or the bullet, Black nationalism now only means, he said, is the political, economic, and social philosophy of Black nationalism only means that we control the politics of our community, okay? And he's putting politics on the table. He's putting the system on the table, okay? Black nationalism now, and he still said, I'm a Black nationalist freedom fighter, right in the beginning of their speech, of the Battle of the Bullet. But now he's not talking about overthrowing systems. He's not talking about violent, bloody revolutions. He's talking about the ballot. And he says, Black nationalism now is a self-help philosophy. It went from being this revolutionary bloody, belligerent movement to now it's a self-help philosophy. And he also said he'd like to be the Billy Graham of Black nationalism. Think about that. Think about that. Malcolm compared himself to Billy Graham. He said in the same way that Billy Graham goes to a city and he just preaches Christ, you know, and he has a big tent and all the denominations come out and he preaches the gospel and none of them feel threatened that he's going to steal followers and that they all can benefit by what he's saying. He said the beautiful thing about the philosophy of Black nationalism is you can be a Christian, you can stay in your church and subscribe to Black nationalism. You can be a Muslim and subscribe to Black nationalism. You can be an atheist, wherever you're at. It just means that we control the politics of our community, the economics of our community. We don't let people come in our other groups and races come in the Black community and take the money out at sundown. You've all heard the speech, all right? But this is the significant point I'd like to leave us with. Is he said, we must know what politics supposed to do for us. That's what he said in the speech. He said, we have to know what politics is to do for us. And he talked about Black folk voting as a block. He said, we're the ones that got Kennedy elected. He said, we vote 80% for the Democratic Party. It's Black women, it's like 90, 99%, 98%. Okay. But now he's talking about politics, and this is one other point that escapes me, but it'll come back to me. But so you know, we have to take these two speeches together and break them down. Here's the point that I wanted to make. This is the most important point I have to make, and then I'll close and I'll open it up for discussion with you very fine and erudite brothers and sisters that come at me, because I know you get at me. But when Malcolm says we need to vote as a block, okay? We need to vote as a block. You have no more of this language of field Negro. You can't house Negro and field Negro. You can't like create that kind of wedge between these two demographics. Okay? You can't attack educated Black people, disparage educated Black people, professional Black people, accomplished Black people, all right? The house Negroes, the seller ones that are trying to hurt. You kind of rhetoric and then at the same time talk about we need to vote as a block, all right? And after Malcolm made his pilgrimage, when he came back, he's not using that kind of language anymore. In fact, he began to realize that he needed those people, because you can't kind of movement with just the so-called grassroots. You can't do it, all right? Every revolution in educated classes, you need people who can think, people who understand philosophy, people that understand economics, people that know how to set up businesses. You need trained people. Okay, even the African revolutionaries that he loved so much, okay, Jomo Kenyatta, he studied in England, Nkrumah studied here in the United States. These were people who were educated from an educated class, all right? The very class, the very so-called bougie Negroes that he used to disparage, days in the nation and in the message to the grassroots. Now, when Malcolm comes back, he realizes, hey, you know, I think what we're going to do in Islam is what guides me. You know what I mean? That's my spiritual fount. It's where I draw, eradicate the race problem in America, should the white man decide to embrace it. But I'm going to work with the totality of the Black community. And now he's going to work with the very people that at one time, the very brothers and sisters at one time that he would disparage as the house Negro, and the ones that were trying to integrate and run back to the plantation. Those are the very people that he puts in positions in the organization of Afro-American Union, okay? People like Lynn Shiflett, and many of them were females. Lynn Shiflett, who was the first African-American female leader. Muriel Philadelphia. Sarah Mitchell, who was a college graduate who was working at the New Yorker, if I'm not mistaken. People like Peter Bailey and these types, okay? These were the bourgeoisie. The people who Howard and Morehouse and Spelman and the white universities. And by the way, this created quite a bit of resentment from those who left the nation with him, okay? It created a great degree of resentment and bitterness that lasted all the way up into, the early 2000s when I, tried to organize something with both of these groups, kind of remembrance of Brother Malcolm. And some of these brothers and sisters were still not talking to one another all these many years later, because many of these brothers and sisters from the Muslim Mosque Incorporated who left with Malcolm, they felt that he, in a sense, betrayed them, first of all, by accepting al-Islam, okay, and rejecting the teachings of Muhammad. They didn't sign up for that. They didn't leave the nation to embrace white people. That's number one. And number two, by creating the organization of Afro-American Unity, he divested Islam of politics. Okay, so we're going to keep our politics separate from our religion. Remember, Muhammad's solution was a total solution. It was the solution to the race question, the race problem, right? Malcolm divested Islam of politics, invested it in the organization of Afro-American Unity. They were very resentful of that. And they just felt like yesterday's news, they felt like Malcolm was leaving them and being with the, the beautiful people, the people that he had taught to resent, okay? And so these old ideas of him and his, kind of negative opinions about the black bourgeoisie, the black intelligentsia, the black professional class, these ideas linger. And I'm going to put this on the table and we can open it up for discussion, but it may have hindered the development of our community to pick up these ideas, okay? Because the plantation of slavery, the house Negro of slavery, the field Negro of slavery, that's one thing, all right? The society that we live in today and in his time, it's a different, either we see America as a plantation, or we see America as a place where we have an investment and, this is our home and this is where we're going to make our way. Some people, if you subscribe to revolution of whatever, socialist revolution, so-called Islamic revolution, or whatever revolution you subscribe to, you should understand that that is assassinated on February 21st, 1965. So I'd like to, to close there.
Okay, brother Abdur Rahman, if you pause just to say two things. First of all, what you're sharing with us has been very insightful, and I think I speak on behalf of all of us. We appreciate it a lot. But two things, your bandwidth is low. I don't know, I'm not a tech person, so I don't know if you can do anything about that. And the other thing, we don't want to run out of time without allowing people to ask their questions. They can post a question in the chat or they can ask it and we'll call on you to do so. So can you still hear me, Abdur Rahman?
I hear you fine. I'm sorry for the bandwidth.
Okay, so that's okay, Ken. So are you ready to entertain questions and comments?
I am absolutely ready. I just put some ideas on the table, but I'm ready to entertain.
Okay, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to the chat and I'm going to read the first chat question. And then if someone has a question that they like to ask you directly, we'll entertain that as well. So let me read the first question in the chat. It says, what do you believe would be the trajectory of Malcolm's direction and focus as far as his platform he had lived, had he lived?
I believe that he really wanted to be as broad-based as in his autobiography. He said that
We have a bad
socialist, communist. Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't know what to tell you.
Just keep trying. Let's just keep trying. Maybe it'll work itself out.
Okay. Yeah, he was at a point in his life where he said he didn't want to be straitjacketed by any kind of hardcore ideology. He had just come out of the nation where he was essentially kind of brainwashed, wasn't speaking for himself, wasn't acting for himself. And he was suspicious of any kind of ideology taken too far. What was going to be his final program? I really can't say. I believe he's Muslim, but he wanted to work with everybody. He was reaching out to Dr. King. He was asking for forgiveness for all the negative things that he has said. Dr. King asked that they forgive him. And I think he of kind of a counterbalance to whatever the civil rights movement was doing. But other than that, I really can't say. Allah knows best.
Okay. Anybody have a question they'd like to pose to Brother Abdur Rahman?
Yes, I have a question.
Okay, go right ahead.
My question is this, alhamdulillah, good presentation. But one thing to keep in mind is that Malcolm his understanding of Islam was evolving, like himself. As he received more understanding of Islam and Islamic principles, I think that would have refined his perspective on not only our conditions, but how he should perceive in the future. So I think this is one thing we have to keep in mind when we try to understand Malcolm and what he was attempting to do at that time and place. So inshallah, I think he was evolving as he evolved from Elijah, more towards Dr. Muhammad's understanding to some respect. You know what I mean? And the next phase would have been, maybe a total a renaissance in terms of his understanding. So inshallah, I think we can appreciate that. I think it would be wrong to assume that when Malcolm was assassinated, that was the person he would have been. That's my question. That's my point.
Yeah, I don't know I don't know where he would have ended up. Only Allah knows our destiny. Someone asked the question, what did I think about One Night in Miami? That's on Amazon. the history is all wrong. I didn't like the profanity that was being used. I didn't like that they had all this drinking going on. They didn't have Malcolm drinking, but they had Muhammad Ali drinking and using profanity. And I had a conversation, very brief conversation last night with Sister Khalila Camacho Ali, his former wife, and she's got some really serious problems with it. She's going to issue. However, I did a whole video on it. It's on Facebook, my Facebook page. I think it's positive to show Black men, wearing suits and engaging in intellectual discussion and perspectives. Because anytime you can put Black men on television in a suit, okay, and speak in a manly way, I think that's important, because Black men by Hollywood for a long time. So, I celebrate that aspect of it, but the history involved in the piece is really kind of convoluted. They have Malcolm trying to recruit Farrakhan to be part of his new group, as a national representative of the nation, which was preposterous. There's so many things out of sequence and what have you. From an artistic point of view, I mean, it seems to have received a wide acclaim, and I don't want to the parade. And I tried to say things that I could say about it, but the history in it is really a mess. So my end of it.
Also said that his relationship at that time, what you spoke about, you said the relationship that he had with Muhammad Ali, he was using that as a chip, as a wedge that he would use if this was his intent, to merge back into the good graces of Elijah Muhammad, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And as his suspension was a little still in existence at that time, I'm not sure the month that he was suspended for, but at that time that he felt that would be something, because you stated that he really wanted to be back in with the Nation of Islam at that point, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know if everybody knew that. I didn't know what that intent was at that time, during the course, especially during the course of this movie, that said that you said it really wasn't, it didn't really have a whole lot going on in the movie other than the fact that sensationalism, and basically a lot of that is just added in to make the movie more entertaining.
Right.
Okay.
It was a relatively, I mean, it was a celebration, but it was, it was very subdued. They ate ice cream. They drank milk. There was no liquor and all that flowing and all that. That wasn't going on. They were eating ice cream and drinking milk. And Jim Brown, in an interview later on with Thomas Hauser, who wrote a book on Muhammad Ali, he said that Malcolm confided in him that night that Malcolm wasn't, he was in trouble with the nation, and that there may have to come a time where he might have to break with Malcolm, and that he was kind of feeling that Malcolm was putting some kind of pressure on him, or trying to, I don't know, stay close to him in order to restore his position back in the nation. In fact, one writer, Peter Goldman, more than one writer, actually. I haven't seen the actual evidence for it, what it's based on, but Peter Goldman and one other writer, at least that I know, said that Malcolm actually called Chicago and said, look, you know, I'll come with the champ. We'll both come to Savior's Day. You know what I'm saying? And it'll be a great day, you know, Malcolm and Cassius, the heavyweight championship of the world. And this was before the fight that Malcolm made this call, according to these writers. And the nation said no dice. They weren't interested. First of all, they didn't think Muhammad Ali was going to win. They didn't think Cassius Clay was going to win. Okay. In fact, of the 58 sports writers who were sent to Miami, okay, only 3 of them gave the fight to Cassius Clay. 55 of the 58 sports writers said that Sonny Liston was going to kill Muhammad Ali. The New York Times sent a reporter. They didn't send a sports reporter. They sent a style reporter. You know what the story they were developing and working on?
What was that?
The New York Times was developing a story about what hospital would Cassius Clay be taken to after Sonny Liston flattened him in the ring. What was the hospital he was going to be taken to? And before this fight, Sonny Liston was like a hated, reviled figure. But Cassius became so, you know, loud and boisterous and maniacal, okay, and the whole black Muslim thing was swirling around him that he became so hated that the tickets started selling again just to see him get his behind whooped by Sonny Liston.
Interesting.
So the nation was keeping their distance from Cassius Clay, and they didn't think that Malcolm had anything to bargain with because they didn't think he was going to win.
I want to follow up one thing. Someone was said in the chat, and I'm paraphrasing their question. They mentioned that during his evolving out of the Nation of Islam, and he established the AA with the organization, and he was embracing all individuals. Now, this is a question to you, and what your take is it? Did that hinder the rest of the Black community because of him embracing all of this new development and organizations that he was embracing, and those who had read, well, and those who were behind him, as you stated earlier about the revolution and the synergy that he was bringing at that time in the nation? When he became this new organization and embracing everybody else again, did it hinder his development? And what was his goal and objectives to move forward for the future? I know you don't know, that's Allahu A'lam, but what do you see in that as being maybe the answer?
Okay, even after he left the nation, all right, there was still, you know, especially, you know, if they had any type of position in society, they were very reticent to get near Malcolm or be associated with Malcolm, because even after he left the nation, he was still talking about the Mau Mau. He was still praising the Mau Mau revolutionaries in Kenya, right? On December 20th, he gave 2 speeches. December 20th, 1964, in the Michael's Congregational Church in Harlem. He was on the same program with Fannie Lou Hamer, okay? Mississippi Freedom Democrats. And in that speech, in the church, which is supposed to be, right, love and forgiveness, okay, and everything we associate with Christianity, okay? He began the speech talking about Odinga Oginga, right, who became the first vice president of Kenya, who was a revolutionary. He was singing the praises of the Mau Mau. And he even said, you know, I know maybe I'm out of order, I'm out of pocket by talking this in a church. So he still frightened a lot of black people. And he refused to take armed self-defense off the table. In fact, later that night at the Autobahn and in subsequent speeches, all right, he was talking about raising money from the audience for a bounty to put on the head of the Klansmen down in Mississippi. All right. So, you know, I mean, really, that's illegal. You can't raise money to go talk about, you know, to pay people to go and kill somebody else, you know. I mean, you know, you talk like that today. I mean, you talk like that back then. So even though he was out of the nation, he was, he didn't want to, and keep in mind too, this is all after the March on Washington. He didn't, you know, he didn't like the March on Washington. He thought, he did think it was a sellout. He thought it diluted the anger of the black masses. Malcolm was pro-black. He didn't want anything integrated. He didn't want an integrated organization. He felt that we had to solve our own problems. So even when he changed his definition of a black nationalist revolutionary from one who overturns the system to making it, you know, a self-help philosophy, all right, he was still quite militant, and he wanted an all-black organization. He didn't believe in integration. He didn't believe in it. He said, I'm not for integration, and I'm not for separation. I'm for freedom. Whatever will get us freedom, I'll be for that. That's what he said.
There's a question that says, what was his relationship truly with Warith Muhammad?
Huh. Whoa. There's a controversy about whether Wallace Muhammad first told Malcolm about Elijah Muhammad's relationship with his secretary and, you know, the babies that were born from those relationships. The controversy is, did Wallace go to Malcolm and tell Malcolm about this? Or, as Warith Muhammad claimed, did Malcolm approach him with it for confirmation, and all he did was confirm what Malcolm already knew? This happened, this conversation took place in February of 1963 at the Savior's Day, okay? Wallace had just been released from prison for draft evasion. He went to prison for the same thing his father did in the 40s, for draft evasion. And he had just gotten out. And Wallace didn't believe in his father's doctrine. And he, you know, was trying to convert Malcolm to al-Islam, to the true Islam. And he talked about Farad, and Farad wasn't God, and it's all a myth and everything like that. You know, that's a big question. I really don't want to get in it, but Wallace, because Malcolm went on television and said, if I hadn't heard it from the messengers, from Elijah Muhammad's own son, I wouldn't have believed it. That Wallace, and a lot of people in the nation. And so they were seen together as being the fitna mongers. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And, you know, Dr. Betty Shaban said that Malcolm shouldn't trust Wallace. You're bringing me into, I don't want to get into, I know both of these men are loved, and I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. I mean, I have my views about it. But that's kind of like what it was. I mean, Wallace, Wallace wasn't afraid of where Malcolm was going. Okay. And you can tell where Wallace went. You know, he thought that Malcolm was, you know, too radical and too militant. And you can see where Wallace took the community once he became the leader. You know, he lifted up the flag. He said, there is no more nation of Islam. Our nation is the United States of America. That's our nation.
Process. What do you advise for particularly the young adult Muslim who are sorting through career choices? What are the challenges ahead with respect to producing something similar to what you played such a major role in?
First thing I would say is you have to have a story to tell. You have to have something you want to say, something that you believe in, you know. Who killed Malcolm X? I mean, is there a bigger story than that, you know, in our community, right? So I had a story to tell. I had research to share. And I had to keep plugging away, because William Bradley, who went on to become Al-Mustafa Shabazz, shotgun assassin, had never been convicted in a court of law. So for many, many years, I had to come up against the lawyers in all of these publications, the New York Times, Washington Post, Newark Star Ledger, on and on and on. We can't publish that. We'll be sued. Many of them had stories in the can, you know, that I kept plugging away. And my research was featured in Manning Marable's book, underwent a Pulitzer Prize. And that put me on a whole kind of platform, especially when Manning passed away and they wanted to verify these facts. I was the only person they could come to. And it was based on my research anyway. Manning's book was already finished before I even shared with him my research. And he went back to Viking Press and he said, hey, I got the killers. We got to include this. So they gave him another 6 months to write the last 2 chapters based on research that I shared with him, in the hope and expectation that we could get the case reopened. See what I mean? I was working on my own book, but morally, Manning was on such a large platform that I didn't feel that I should hold on to it. You know how people get, oh man, that's mine. I ain't sharing that with you. How much you gonna pay me? Blah, 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 blah. You know, and in the meantime, we thwart justice. So I shared the information with him. But even then, the lawyers at Viking Press wouldn't let him publish it. They had to find a legal way to get this in the book. So the way we got around that was, here's what we came up with. Law against libel, the libel law in Washington, D.C., where I live, and in New Jersey, where this man lived, William Bradley, Al-Mustafa Shabazz, is 1 year. 1 year, okay? If I write an article about him in which I accuse him of committing a murder, of committing this murder, he has 1 year to bring a suit against me, all right? He has 1 year. If in that year, he doesn't sue me for libel or slander, then what I say about him becomes part of the public record and it can be cited by other scholars. See what I mean? So, and that's what we did. In 2010, you'll notice I wrote that article, right? Where I put his picture up and I said, you know, let the historical record reflect that the man pictured above, William Bradley, is the shotgun assassin of Malcolm X. I didn't say he's the alleged shotgun assassin. I didn't say that. I said, is the shotgun assassin. That's libelous. All right, he could have sued me for that because he had not been convicted in a court of law. And when Viking Press, after almost a year, saw that he did not sue me, then that gave them the confidence to allow Manning to include it in his book. That's how that worked. But to answer the question about, that was a long answer to say, you have to have a story that you believe in. Mm-hmm. You have to stick with it no matter what. Okay? You have to maintain a positive mental attitude, and you have to learn as much as you can about, film production. So much now is available online. You can get an entire education on how to put together a film. Now, one more thing. You have to get your project to the point where you have someone who can bring it in the room. What I mean bring it in the room, if you want it to be on the level of Who Killed Malcolm X, you need people that have money, right? There has to be, Who Killed Malcolm X, a little less than $1.5 million. Obviously, I don't have that kind of money, right? So money had to be raised. In order to do that, they got to make sure I'm okay. So, extensive background checks was done on me. I'm even told they, the people that put the money up for Arc Media, who I was involved with, the team, they do an extensive, before they put that kind of money on the table, they got to make sure they can put you on television, man. We can't have any kind of scandal come back on us. Man got this conviction and so on and so forth. They can't have that. So you have to have someone, and usually usually it's a certain group of people that know how to handle it.
Says in the film, the police were so negligent in protecting Malcolm, both by lack of presence and reprimanding the informant who gave Malcolm mouth to mouth. Is there any history of suits against the police?
There's suits. Back in 1957, the Johnson incident where you had a brother in the Nation of Islam who was savagely assaulted by the police. We all know of that episode, when Malcolm called out the fruit and they stood post outside the police station. That was settled in court, and brother he was awarded $75,000 for having his skull busted open. Plate had to be put in his head. At the time, that was the highest settlement for police violence, police misconduct in New York City history. But related to Gene Roberts giving Malcolm mouth to mouth, no. In fact, no one even knew that he was a police officer until the Panther trial, early 70s.
Yes, Brother Abdur Rahman, our final question is, what happened to Malcolm's group after his death? Did it survive?
What happened after it? In terms of the Muslim Mosque Incorporated, here's what happened. A number of the brothers and sisters, believe it or not, went back to the Nation of Islam. Can you believe that? A number of them just became inactive. There was a climate of fear. No one really knew, where the hit came from, the extent of government involvement. there was a lot of fear and even, I would say, paranoia, all right, surrounding his assassination. And a lot of folks became fearful and just dissipated. One of the others who received a scholarship to Al-Azhar University, as you recall, Malcolm received from the Supreme Council of Islam in Egypt, he received 20 scholarships to Al-Azhar University, and he also received from, what is it, the Muslim World League, he received another 15 scholarships. He got 15 scholarships altogether to study at the University of Medina, 15 to study at the University of Medina in Saudi Arabia, 20 for Al-Azhar University. One of the brothers who got that was the brother who would go on to be called Imam Tawfiq, Ahmed Tawfiq, who founded the Mosque of the Islamic Brotherhood. And to my knowledge, under the leadership of Imam Talib Abdur Rashid, many of the Muslim Mosque Incorporated brothers who remained loyal to Malcolm settled into that community, and that's where many of their janazas were performed. Imam Talib performed janazah for a number of those brothers and sisters who were with Malcolm, and I think that's the only masjid that has, a direct link to those scholarships that Malcolm brought back. The Organization of Afro-American Unity, it was taken over by his sister Ella Collins. Ella and Rodnell. There was another young brother who, Dr. James, Professor Smalls was involved in that, the brother who leads the pilgrimage to his gravesite every year. That continued on for some time, but Ella is not Malcolm. Ella is not Malcolm, and it just kind of dissipated. Just dissipated. The reality of it is that because the ideology wasn't really formed, and Malcolm didn't really give it a chance to develop structure. His absence, the void of him not being there, it just wasn't the same, and of course it just dissipated. The best way to keep his legacy alive is to be a good Muslim and to try to make Islam a reality, to produce children in a community that can remember him. This is Islam, to leave the next generation that can make dua for us and to carry the legacy forward. You notice in Who Killed Malcolm X, there's a lot of Islam in there. You see brothers making salat, right? You hear the call to prayer. There's a lot of subtle, you see me making salah. There's a lot of subtle dawah in there. Projects like that, film projects, productions. There's the subject hasn't been exhausted. Creative output. I would say the best thing to do is just be a good Muslim and try to, like I say, produce a strong Muslim family and a strong Muslim community. I think that's the best way to carry forth Malcolm's legacy. Great pleasure to be with you guys today. As it's just great to see the old faces, and we have to do it again, inshallah.
Thank you so much.
Inshallah, we will.
May Allah reward you.
Thank you very much.
Abundantly. Alhamdulillah. Thank you for your erudition.
We are told that the best dua is to begin with salawat on Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
ألا بذكرك قلبي يطمئن ألا بذكرك قلبي يطمئن وهل بغير ذكرك قلب المرء يرتاح